Welcome back. Well, yes, indeed, we've seen consistent communication and submissions from different persons. I mean, one of the most recent ones we've seen is that of Emir Sanusi, who was talking about fuel subsidy payment, subsidizing electricity, how he thinks if we're going to be servicing debt with about 70% of our revenue, we're managing 30 to run government, then we'll have problems. So there's been that suggestion, age-long one, I might add, in terms of to do away with subsidy. But they've gone back and forth about it, where many just think, look, they don't know which government will bite the bullet, take the bull by the horn and take that particular step, removing fuel subsidy or giving us the true position of what is going on with fuel subsidy. So those are part of the issues we'll be considering this morning, in addition to the Vice President has talked so much about creating a template, a framework, even the President in his speech, how data that we can build on upon which they can then go ahead and then, that plan, or if we could call it a plan, of getting, 10 million people out of poverty, 100,000 people out of poverty in 10 years. He says we've got a database, but you have people who ask several questions too. So this database, has it gotten to that point where we can refer to it as a national database? Could they have worked with the NIM and all of this conversation? So we'll see what happens. So let's get some perspective on some of these matters as we go to Abuja. Magwa.
Thank you, Chamberlain. Indeed, we're joined by Mr. Iowa Apera, who is the National Coordinator of the National Social Safety Net Coordinating Office, NASCO. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Thank you.
I believe that's your office, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, interesting. I mean, sometimes you never get to know about some of these offices until, issues come to the fore. So can you tell us what indeed your office does?
Okay, the national...
And since when it has been in existence?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. The National Social Safety Net Coordinating Office, NASCO, is under the Office of the Vice President and supervised by the Special Advisor to the President on Social Investment. It was established in 2016.
I see.
And the main purpose for setting up the office was to support the federal government or lead the federal government's efforts on a coordinated implementation of social safety net programs. Now, the program has two major components. One component is to build the National Social Register, and the second component is coordinate social safety nets programs. At the moment, the federal government, through a World Bank facility, has three of the social safety nets programs. One is the National Cash Transfer Office. The other is the Youth Employment and Social Support Operations, and the other one is the Community and Social Development Program, CSDP. So these three programs are under the watch of NASCO and the coordination of NASCO, and then I sit there as a national coordinator. I
see. So now you're looking at the cash transfer. A lot of people are aware of that. But is that where trader money is also situated?
No, trader money is not situated there. So there's a suite of social investment programs by the federal government that sits elsewhere with other team leads. So you have the JIP, which also has the trader money and the other soft loans to small business interest. You have the homegrown school feeding program, and then you have the Empower. All these three sit on a different plate than mine. So mine is strictly social safety nets, and perhaps more to it, the difference is that for the social safety nets programs, they are poverty targeted. So they are from the extremely poor, and they draw their beneficiaries mostly from the poor and vulnerable. The list of poor and vulnerable that the president mentioned in his democracy speech. So the list of beneficiaries are actually mined from the list of the poor and vulnerable for these targeted interventions.
So when the president is looking at taking 100 million people out of poverty in the next 10 years, I mean, he's not going to be there all of the 10 years, certainly. But it will mean that your office is going to be saddled with that responsibility of identifying who those people are and perhaps the best way to ensure that these people are taken out of poverty. Is that right?
Yes. So when the president mentioned 100 million people, I'm sure all of us, our eyes went out, wow, 100 million, how do we do it? But the office of the NASCO is also set up to sort of establish some of the building blocks for a sustainable social safety net programs that will ensure that we do not only have the poor of the poorest through a very well-defined process. Now, how do we raise the list of the poor and vulnerable? We do that through a combination of 3 targeting mechanisms. The first one is the geographical mapping. This country has been ranked from the poor to the poorest LGAs across the 774 LGAs across the states. Now, this is based on empirical evidence from data collected by the Bureau of Statistics. One is currently going on, the National Living Standard Survey, that would sort of define the state of poverty around the country. And this, of course, once these LGAs are ranked, we approach the state. We are in agreement with the state with an MOU. They set up an office. They do all of that. Then we go back with the state with the poverty ranking of their LGAs and say, here is the list of your poorest LGAs to the poor to the poorest LGAs, right? And so across the 3 senatorial districts, we take the first 30% poorest LGAs to start enumeration. And now when we take those first 30% LGAs, we then get to the LGAs, we recruit the team, we call them the community-based targeting team, CBT team, from the local government staff. And then they are trained, they then go to the community. And that's where what we call the community-based targeting system takes place.
From the local government staff, some people would say in most of these areas, the local governments are almost non-existent. Yes, indeed, they have staff. I mean, that's not to say they haven't employed people that they're paying salaries. Yeah. However, you know, they're hardly at work.
We kind of underestimate what happens out there without actually being there. We have been to these local governments. We have employed. In fact, we do a screening. The local government teams, it's 18 people that we recruit, the state coordinating unit recruits. And they go through an interview process, a full-blown competitive recruitment process. And the best 18 are picked from each LGAs.
Well, let me get this straight. You're telling us about what you intend to do moving forward. Is that right? Or
no,
you're telling us
I'm telling you what we have done
so far
across 36 states of the Federation.
In other words,
and Abuja.
You've already done the mapping.
The mapping has already been done.
You picked the first 30%.
The first 30% has been picked. The LGA staff have been trained. They are at the moment collecting data in first 30% LGAs across the states. And we've signed memorandum of understanding with all the 36 states and Abuja. We've set up offices in 35 states, except for Ogun now, that we are working with the government to do that. There is a standard criteria from the MOU that the state government will need to put some structures on ground. Without those structures, we will not start activities in that state.
So the first 30% cuts across all the states of the Federation?
Yes.
Okay, some more than others?
Not. So it depends on the total number of local governments in that state. So where you have a 23 local governments in the state, 30% gives you around 9 local governments, right? But for equity, we take the first 30 poorest LGAs in each senatorial district. So I'll give you an example. We go to Abia State, the 3 senatorial districts of Abia. You see the poverty ranking of all of the LGAs. And then you pick the first 30 poorest LGAs across the 3 senatorial districts, Abia North, I think, about Abia South, Abia Central.
The first 30 poorest LGAs, did you say? But yeah. they might not have up to 30 local government areas.
30%.
Oh, 30%.
Yes. So the 30% range from 6 states, 6 LGAs, 9 LGAs, In the case of Kano with, I think, 45 LGAs, you look at 16 or thereabout, Adamawa around 13 or 14, you know. So depending on the total number of LGAs in the state, but we'll take only the first 30% poorest across, as I said, the senatorial district. But when we do that, we engage the community. So we'll do a pre-sensitization visit to meet the community elders, community leaders, to talk to them and educate them on what is happening. And then we'll do a full-blown sensitization and mobilization of the communities, where all the community members are gathered in one single place. And so we divide the community into 3 focal group discussions. The first group is the youth, the second, the women, and the third, the male adults. Now, each of these groups, they define in their community, in their context, what is poverty. Now, you find a lot of definitions. For instance, a villager will tell you, if in the morning we don't see smoke coming out of that round hut, we know they can't even eat breakfast, right? Or they have all the 7 members of the family sleep in one round hut on mats, for instance. They define the poverty in their context. And you know Nigeria is dynamic. And so one issue from the south varies from the north, west, east, all of those issues.
So let me get this straight. How do you say you approach the community and they are the ones that will have to pick out the poorest within their community?
You're right.
Are people selfless enough to do that?
Yes.
They are.
You will be surprised that when you get to the community and you divide them into these 3 groups, the youths will argue within themselves and say, okay, who are the poorest amongst us? And so they will identify those households, right? Then the women will also identify those households that they think they are the poorest within the community. And so will be the male adults. They will bring the 3 groups all together into a plenary, and then we harmonize the list, right? And so you could have a situation where the woman decided that this particular family is actually poor, but the youth will disagree, and they will have their reasons. And so they will debate and then agree. For our community, here's a list of the poor and vulnerable. Once that is agreed, the community members select 2 people, 1 male, 1 female, and they sign off on this list. Once they sign off on that list, that signed off list is left in the community. A copy is taken by the community targeting team from the LGA back to the LGA, where the enumeration team then comes and enumerate the identified households. And they pick information from the head of the family to the last person in the house. They also pick information on the proximity of that household to the nearest amenity, social amenities like hospital, schools, roads, electricity, etc. They also take information on the assets. Do they use a lantern? Do they have electricity? Do they have a television, mats? Every single thing that defines the degree of wealth of a family, the information is taken. When this comes back, it comes to the LGA, who then send it up to the state office. The state office have a team that's also trained, that interact with this data, clean up this data, and where they find discrepancies or issues, they send it back to the local government teams to go back and validate, right? Now, once the state finish with this list, it becomes a state social register. Then the state then sends it up to Abuja, where we further interact with the data. And there's a whole process, a very long process, to ensure that, 1, it is accurate, and it is actually the data from the poor, rest of the poor in the community that was selected. Once this is finished, it is then approved and uploaded into the National Social Register.
How many do you currently have in the register?
We have 1,099,000 poor and vulnerable households in the social register across 29 states of the Federation.
And this is just the first 30%?
This is just the first 30%. And the first 30% also in most of the states, we have not saturated the local governments yet. So you pick first 30% poorest LGAs, you start with the poorest communities. The communities are also ranked. You start with the poorest communities. And so you work your way up to saturate the local government. Once you finish saturating the LGs, the entire 30% LGs, then you move on to the next 50% LGs. Then you move to the next 75% LGs, then 100 LGs. Eventually, we are going to saturate every single community in this country, every LGA, every state of the federation.
You know, it is interesting that you have adopted this, it would seem, federal character approach. Every state must, you know, of course every state has poor people in them. But, you know, I'm sure if you had a common, and you said that that is difficult because what is poverty in one place might not be poverty in another place. However, if there was a yardstick which you could use, you might find that there might be a concentration of poor people in a particular area than there is in some other areas. Don't you think that we're shortchanging people who desperately need help through this approach of the federal government?
Not at all. In the sense that it's the community members themselves that identify this poor and vulnerable.
No, by that,
that's the first.
I understand that.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is right now, you're only dealing with the first 30%.
Yes.
There might be other people in all the other communities that have not been touched, that are possibly poorer than even the 30% whom you have touched, or might be at the same level, if not at a worse-off level, than those whom you've already touched.
Okay. Yes, of course. So our approach is to start with the poorest LGAs. So when you say the concentration of poor people, then certainly the poorest LGAs will have a concentration of the poorest people. Perhaps that's the logic, right? But we're dealing with empirical data, real evidence of data that has been collected by a completely different body, the Bureau of Statistics, validated by the World Bank, the UNICEF, which is what they use as a poverty ranking of Nigeria, right? This data has been taken a couple of years and it's been updated every 2 years, I think, right? And that is so it's established. So, for instance, in FCT, if you look at, maybe not FCT is not a good example as it has only 6 LGAs, right? But you go to a place like, say, Benue, right? And then you take the poorest LGAs. It is the poorest LGAs.
I'm very interested in the Abuja example. Give us the Abuja example.
Okay, in Abuja example,
Yes.
for instance, we'll start with a Abaji, right? And we've started with Abaji. We're in Kuje, and we're in Buari, right? Now, there are 6 LGAs in our...
6 districts.
6 districts.
Yes.
And these are the poorest by the poverty ranking. So when we get to Abaji, Abaji has an average, each LGA in Nigeria has about 261 communities, averagely 10 political wards, right? Now, in these 261 communities, you still have the LGA that basically rank which are the poorest. Where do we have more poor people within the LGAs? You would take a rough thumb as people, LGAs or communities that are in remote areas, right? And these are the people that we'll start with. These are the communities that we'll start with.
Okay, let's go to Lagos now. I believe that Chamberlain and my colleagues have another guest standing by. Chamberlain.
Well, yes, we've got Oke Onuchukwu, who is a professor of economics. He joins us via Skype from Port Harcourt. Good morning, Professor. Thank you for joining us today. Well, just listening to Mr. Apera this morning speaking about the economic model that, I beg your pardon, the model that they're using for his office, wherein they identify the first 30%, the community identifies the first 30%, then they attend to them before they move forward. Eventually, they'll have that information go to the state office. Give us your impression, how you think, how much can this strategy, this model achieve, perhaps in context of us trying to move people out of poverty in the country?
Well, basically, Chamberlain, good morning. I say good morning to everybody in channels. Using a model of 30%, identifying 30% in each community and trying to maybe empower them to move out of poverty. If I listen to Mr. President clearly when he did his Democracy Day speech, that they are going to move 100 million people out of poverty between now and the next 10 years. And this is one of the strategies they're adopting. But you and I know that the level of poverty is such that any money that goes into, people's hand in the community, they will use it to take care of themselves because they have to satisfy consumption, expenditure first before you talk about, doing business. Unless they want to identify those that are already into small-scale businesses, but they are looking for funds, to expand. That would be better instead of just identifying any and anybody and then giving money to support. And you and I know that in this country, there could be very beautiful plan, but implementation becomes a problem because of some intervening variables. And it will also come now, some politicians will want to begin to use it to favor, their brothers and their sisters, So that is the kind of problem we have in this country. If it is something that is done sincerely, but first of all, we must identify those that are really, into small-scale businesses and they're looking for funds, to expand and grow their business. Then give them funds. That will, impact positively. But for those that are not just doing anything and you give them funds, basically they will use it to satisfy consumption expenditure. It has happened quite all right in our area when this amnesty thing was going on. The boys will just wait at the end of the month to pay them. They use it to satisfy, their consumption expenditure. Only but very few that are into, some meaningful activities up to today.
To break at the, now, but we'll come back to some of the issues you raised, interrogating the credibility of those data gotten and the examples perhaps that they can learn from when we come back after the break. Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Prof, let me come back to you on this matter. When you say that if those funds are given to them, they will use them to satisfy personal needs, I'm just wondering, what is wrong with that? Because, even in satisfying personal needs, funds will still flow from one person to the other within the community.
Hello, Chamberlain.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, so I did ask that when you say that when those funds get to those individuals in the community, that they will use them to satisfy personal needs, what is wrong with that? Even because, the funds will still flow from one person to the other within the community.
No, the idea is not just, to satisfy individual consumption. The idea is to sustain the people because there is nothing there if you give me money and I eat it up and tomorrow I'll start, looking for something. You have not put me out of poverty. The idea is to give you some seed money so that you're able to use it to generate funds to sustain yourself. So what I'm saying in essence is that the only way this can work is for us to do a proper survey and identify those that are actually in business, support them so that the business can expand. And if the business expands, they can employ some other people that are, around the community instead of just giving the money to the people. Because if you give me money today, assuming I live in a typical village, you give me money today, I use it to satisfy my consumption need, and the money finishes. What else? So I also know that consumption stimulates investment. But the idea here is not just to give people money to feed, but is to give them money, to generate more funds in order to sustain, themselves by going into micro businesses. You and I know that if you look at the Asian Tigers, model, that, over 60% of the GDP of, say, Japan and China, Singapore are from small-scale industry. So the idea here is to develop, the small and medium-scale industry to the extent that the people who are involved in it will be able to sustain themselves and also contribute, to national development and contribute to the growth of the economy.
You're saying, Professor, that this program or this model is not likely to be able to sustainably take people out of poverty?
Yeah, quite all right.
So, in other words,
like I said, just giving me funds, to start something, I can use it to finance consumption, and the money finishes. What else? So I'm saying that the best thing to do, it's possible to pull people out of poverty, but the best thing to do, we shouldn't be in a too much hurry to give people money. What we should do is to conduct a survey and identify those that actually need this fund to expand their business. Because the core thing here is to generate production. It's only when you generate production that you create value chain. And when the value chain is created, you now create opportunity for employment. And when you employ people, you empower them socially because they can afford, to take care of themselves. Then we are beginning to talk about lifting people out of poverty. But just giving money like that, like I gave you an example of some of the things that happened in the amnesty program. People collect money, use it to take care of their immediate needs, and the money finishes tomorrow. They open their hands for another money. So that is the kind of thing, that is going to happen to this program if, proper survey is not actually conducted to identify those that actually need, these funds to grow their business.
Is there a problem then with the process that is going, with which the database is being harnessed now, where the operators go to the poorest of the poor and they are identified by the people in their communities who identify them as the poorest among them? Is there a problem with that process?
No, there's no problem. There's no problem with the poorest among the poor. What I'm saying is that if you identify them and they are not doing anything, you just give them money. So what will that do? The man, first of all, will jump up. I have not paid my child school fees. He will use that to pay the child school fees. So if you identify the poorest of the poor, the best thing is bring them out, train them on a particular trade, and then ensure that when you set them up, they are going to sustain it, instead of just giving, money to the poorest, poor. So fantastic idea, by identifying the poorest poor. But we must transform them into business people that will tomorrow sustain themselves and not just getting the seed money and then use them to solve the immediate problem. That is what I'm saying. And please
yes,
also
Prof, if I may jump in, that particular point that you just ended up with is very critical. As a matter of fact, people see it as the missing link. If you have the poorest of the poor, and then they are not adequately trained on how to spend 10,000 naira, which the government, it depends on where, at least a minimum of 10,000 naira, to start up a business. Where does that then lead us to?
It leads us to nowhere. Like I said, giving the poorest, look, we have tried it in the communities. I tried it in my community, identify, every 100 persons in a month to give 10,000 naira. And my brother, believe me, that at the end of the day, they use it to take care of their, their immediate need. Pay their children's school fees at the local level, and then move on. The next month, they wait for, such largesse again. So what I'm saying is that we need to really identify the people first, then go ahead to train them in a particular trade, then set them up, instead of just going there and giving them 10,000 naira. Definitely that money will go into consumption. And
okay,
it will mean
okay then. What would you say to the role of education coming first before we have this kind of projects?
Well, that is the basic thing. That's the baseline, like I was talking about training. Education does not really end in going to classroom to learn one theory or the other. When you go down to practically expose the people to a particular skill that will earn them money, that will be better before you can now support them, with seed money. Even in the university now, we try as much as possible to emphasize skill, entrepreneurship, because you find out that most of our graduates, when they come out, looking for white-collar job, they won't get. And some of them will finish from national service, roam the street for over 2-3 years, no job. So now in the university, we're beginning to design our curriculum so that we include entrepreneurship into it. And that entrepreneurship has skill-based, such that if you're in the program, you learn a particular trade. And when you graduate, you can, develop that trade for, your own growth and the betterment of, your environment and your people. But just seeing people and giving them money, Chamberlain, I'm telling you, is not really going to mean anything. It's not going to work. We will still go back to the same vicious cycle of giving people money and they eat it up and use it for consumption.
All right, one more thing, Prof. Give us your impression about this, well, almost age-long debate now concerning what do we do with fuel subsidy. I mean, Emir Sanusi was being quoted copiously in the dailies here today saying it may not be sustainable. In fact, it is not sustainable if we're servicing a debt with 70% of our revenue, managing 30. subsidizing electricity consumption, fuel consumption, that may just lead us down south. Do you think it will be a good idea to remove the fuel subsidy, and how should they approach it?
Well, quite all right. Well, I agree with Sanusi, but that is something we don't need to do in a hurry, because basically we need to actually identify, what is the landing cost of fuel here. How much is government paying to subsidize a liter of petrol that goes into my car? Because each time they talk about this subsidy thing, I run crazy, because I don't know what government is paying for me, to drive my car as subsidy. First of all, we need to know that if the thing is not a scam. Then two, the issue is that why must we, be talking about subsidy at this particular time on petroleum product when Nigeria, produces crude oil? Why can't we put our refineries in order and also ensure that those that are giving licenses actually, develop their refineries in order to make the product available, so that all these things will go away. If you listen to a particular interview that Felix Akuga, the former AIT guy, conducted on Madam Black, these people that are doing illicit refinery, the woman was clear and blunt that they produce, petrol, they produce kerosene, and they produce diesel, and they sell them as low as 50 naira per liter, and they make profit. And the graduates who are employed in that place earn as much as 20,000 naira per day. And if you multiply that by 30 days, that's about 600,000 naira for a graduate. So why will we be talking about subsidy on, petroleum product? This is something we can do for ourselves, and then ensure that, the product is available for domestic consumption, and then the excess will sell out, to neighboring countries and people that need this, and make foreign exchange, to develop other sectors of the economy, particularly the real sector of agriculture and manufacturing. So at this time of our development, we shouldn't have been talking about this. So I think that government should have the political will to, first of all, look at what is happening in the Niger Delta area and see how they can transform them into modular refineries like we've been discussing before. I was very happy when Oshibanjo, as acting president, came to the Niger Delta and said that, look, this issue of modular refinery, they're going to look at it and then see how they can put them in place. Because if you do that and you have these small refineries around the creek, the boys will be employed, their income will be increased, their life will be better off, welfare will increase, militancy will reduce, product will be available for me and you to buy, and then excesses will be sold out. But we'll just keep, moving round and round. Why some particular group of people bringing petroleum product into the country and sell to Nigerians at a exorbitant rate and make money, and also steal money from government in form of subsidy. So I don't really find this idea of subsidy. Government must have who will do something in that direction.
All right, okay, Onuchukwu, Professor of Economics, thank you for your time and your thoughts this morning on the program. Makwa?
Well, yes, Iowa Apara is still with us in the studio, and he definitely has a thing or two to say about Prof's response. But just before he does, I think it's important that we put it out there that indeed the social register has, about 1 million plus people, maybe about 1.1 million. You want to give us the exact figures?
Yeah, so the social register of the poor and vulnerable in the country across 29 states at the moment, poorest, 30% poorest of the LGAs, has 1,099,000 poor and vulnerable households.
1,099,000, but you're only...
It's households.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, households.
Now, it has 3,999,000 individuals within that social register. So we take information from the family point of view and the individual members of the family. Okay. So it's all in the social register.
But not everybody in the social register right now is getting the 5,000 naira.
No. What
is the percentage of people getting that?
The percentage is around 68% are eligible. So
which is what?
Now, let me take a step back and explain the process, okay?
We don't have enough time for that. I just need the figures. The
figures. We have 319,000 individuals on the cash transfer program that have been mined from the social register and are currently collecting cash. but actually 681,000 poor and vulnerable households are actually eligible for the cash transfer. Now, the cash transfer also takes a process of enrollment. When they mine from this social register, they go back to the community through another team, cash transfer focal persons team, that then enroll the poor and vulnerable house into the cash register that is then paid through the cash transfer. So they set up, they get the...
I'm very confused right now, but
yeah.
what I'm trying to get out of this is, how many people are currently getting 5,000 naira? Or if you're not doing them by people or as individuals, how many households?
317,000 households.
Okay, great. I think that answers my question. Now, you heard Prof there. He says this 5,000 naira is only fueling consumption. It's not fueling productivity. How do you respond to that?
Okay, so when you give, first, the government is not dashing people money. It's a strategic investment in the victims of our inaction in the past, so to say, the poor and vulnerable. Now, when you give the poor person any amount of money, evidence abound that he uses 64% of that for consumption. Now, let's unpack the 64%. Now, when you take 64% on consumption, what do you use for consumption? Basic food needs. Maybe you buy rice, you buy oil, and all of that. But let's take an example of rice, so that I'll break it down for our understanding. Now, when this poor family goes to the market, to this vendor, and buys rice, maybe the vendor has been stocking only a bag of rice that takes him a whole month to sell. But because there's money in the community, the families are buying this rice, he would have to stock his shop with 10 bags of rice
So
to meet the demand.
It will fuel the businesses of other people.
Yeah.
But not the business of the person who is getting the 5,000 naira.
Now, he uses only 65% for consumption. 24% of that is for savings, it is safe, and then about 11% for investment.
Do you have evidence of that?
Yes,
that people
we do
can actually save from 5,000 naira?
Of course. We have evidence of an existing program implemented by Save the Children and Action Against Hunger in Zamfara and Jigawa State. And if you Google the CDGP program, midterm evaluation, you will see clear evidence of these percentages that I'm talking to.
No, my point is, the savings you're talking about is not from your own program. It's
our own program. For now,
yeah,
we have in excess of 150 million naira savings across the countries for those cash transfer programs that are into savings groups.
Oh, well, I know that this conversation is going to be an ongoing one, considering the fact that so many people are still yet to be touched. You're only talking about 30% in 20 states as we speak, and there are still so many states to be covered, and of course the remaining 70% in these other areas. But we have to thank you for coming on Sunrise Elite this morning. Iowa Apera is the National Coordinator, National Social Safety Net Coordinating Office, NASCO. That's it for this segment. Sunrise Elite continues in a moment. Please stay with us.